Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 723 for the first of Kislev in a regular year. Happy Rosh Chodesh. This is Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Very exciting Rosh Chodesh because this month of Kislev is when we're actually going to be concluding the Tanya and starting it anew. Kislev is a really big month in the world of Chabad. A lot of Hasidic holidays come out in this month, and maybe I'll mention some of them as we go through it. And the first and foremost one is Yotes Kislev, which is coming up, which is the birthday of Chassidus, in which we commemorate when the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, and we begin the Tanya anew. So stay tuned for that coming up in just a short while, in a little under 3 weeks' time. All right, so getting into today's section, think back. We're going to come back and think back to when we were children and when you were in school. This will be particularly relevant to those of you that went to Jewish schools, but even if you did not go to a Jewish school, then most likely you can relate in some way to something similar. So those of you that went to Jewish schools, then you remember that there was a time we had to daven in school. So from a very early age in Jewish schools, then teachers instruct children how to daven, and there's like davening time in the very beginning of the day where all the students are at their desks and they have a sitter and they daven, and the teacher monitors them and make sure that everybody is davening. So think back to that time and think about it. What were you honestly thinking about while you were davening? Were you thinking about God consciously? I mean, maybe you were a very holy kid. Or were you more concerned with the teacher not catching you talking to your friends, or making sure that the teacher sees that you are behaving properly and doesn't punish you? So I don't know what the answer is to that. And for those of you that did not go to Jewish school, perhaps you can think of another equivalent to this in your life, maybe saying the Pledge of Allegiance in school. If you did that, were you really thinking about the words so much, or were you just mostly concerned with the teacher not catching you? So whatever the case is, as we'll learn today, even if your main concern as a child was not getting caught and not having the teacher scold you and punish you, then that's not that bad. And that in fact, children are very pure, and there's a certain purity that children have that we all kind of should aspire to. And in fact, all of us do have this inner child inside that is pure in the sense, and that in fact these prayers of children should not be taken very lightly, and that they actually ascend very high to the point that we can actually use this ascension of the prayers of children as a point of comparison for when a person learns Torah in kind of like a neutral way, like when a person's just like learning Torah, but they're not necessarily consciously thinking about God, as we mentioned. Their Torah, in that case, rises to the same level as the level of these children praying. And in fact, as we'll learn, the prayer of children actually can rise even higher than that. So, okay, so to put all of this into context, so we've been learning really deep stuff. We're in this place of Kuntres Acharon, the final section of the Tanya, which, as I've said many times, is a very Kabbalistic portion of the Tanya. It's the last portion of the Tanya where the Alter Rebbe really tackles a lot of deep Kabbalistic ideas and compares and contrasts them and gets into deeper explanations of them based on things that he wrote in Tanya, based on different ideas that come up in Kabbalistic Sfarim, and where he finds seeming contradictions, and he attempts to resolve these contradictions. So we've been learning the third essay in Kuntres Acharon, in which we began talking about the different effects that our intentions have when we on our prayer and on our Torah study, and when it can, what type of ascensions can happen, what type of angels might be created, things like that. For a full review of that, please go back and listen to yesterday's episode. I'm not going to reiterate it all now. But today, what we're going to be looking at and examining is some Kabbalistic writings that seem to contradict one another, and as we'll see, they don't. Where there's discussion about different types of ascension, like we've been talking about, occur or don't occur when there is different types of intention or lack thereof. So intention in prayer and Torah study can basically be categorized into three categories. There's good intention, positive intention, like having this orientation towards God and really tapping into a person's love of and fear of God. Then there's neutral intention, where a person learns Torah study or prays, but isn't necessarily thinking about God. It's, they're just kind of thinking about something else or whatever. And then there's negative intention. There's intention which is negative in nature, where a person's learning Torah for the sake of some ulterior motive, like self-aggrandizement or something like that. In the sake of prayer, it's not so apparent what that would be, but we can say maybe prayer that where a person's really distracted by things that really are against God, type of thing. And what we're going to be studying today is we're going to be looking at various Kabbalistic writings that discuss the effects of these different intentions that seem kind of strange at first glance, because it kind of seems as if when a person has negative intent, there's an elevation that happens that's higher than when a person has neutral intent or even positive intent. Or that when a person prays without intent at all, in one place in the Zohar, we'll see that it discusses that there's still a certain ascension that happens, whereas another place in the Zohar seems to indicate that there is no ascension that happens. So we're going to try to sort through all of this and understand what's going on. In brief, kind of like the answer to all of this is that the more you learn Chassidus, the more you learn Kabbalah and these kind of Kabbalistic ideas, the more you start to see that everything is very relative. There's these terms that we throw around a lot, like Malchus, Zah, Bia, all kinds of different things. And each one has its own series of levels. So it's weird even. This is why I think it's kind of like I've never seen a proper map of like the spiritual realms of like the Seder Hishtalshelus, because it would be really, really tricky to do this, because it's like there's so many different levels and there's so many various like intricacies behind it all, and where it might seem like that you're on a higher level on the one hand, when you zoom out and you look at the bigger picture, you're actually on a lower level. So like, for example, if we say that you are on the level of Zer Anpin, if you've been following along the podcast, hopefully you know some of these terms already. So you say like, Zer Anpin versus Malchus, which one is higher? So pop quiz. So Zer Anpin is higher, right? Yes and no, because that would be true if we're looking at them in the same place, in the same world, in the same perspective. But what if we're talking about the level of Malchus of Atzilus versus Zer Anpin of Asiya, for example? In that case, the Malchus is actually higher. So everything is really relative. And that's what we really need to keep in mind as we explore the section for today. So let's get into it. And to the best of my ability, I'll try to give this over. Again, these ideas are quite complex, and I don't have a full grasp and understanding of some of these things, especially when it gets into the chambers and stuff like that, as we'll get there. But take from it what you can, and we'll learn this together. It's an exciting journey. It's fun to be challenged. So stick with it and bear with me. And so here we go. So the Alter Rebbe begins by contrasting two different places in the Zohar that seem to contradict each other in terms of whether prayer without intention ascends to any place, and if so, where does it ascend to? So on the one hand, in the Zohar, in the section regarding Parshas Pekudai, then it says that the Zohar writes that such prayer that without intention rises to the lowest heaven. Rakia Tata in Hebrew, which seems to indicate that it does rise. It rises to a certain place, to the lowest heaven. Whereas when we see in the Zohar and Parshas Vayakhel, then it says that the only prayer that rises is prayer that has proper intention connected with it, which seems to imply that if you do not have proper intention, then it doesn't rise at all. So what's going on? Does it rise to the lowest heaven? Does it not rise to the lowest heaven? What's going on? So the Alter Rebbe says that this is not a contradiction at all, because when we're talking about, so in Parshas Pekudai, where it talks about this lower heaven, this is a reference to the lowest of heavens that governs the world, that governs the world, and this is a reference to Malchus of Asiya. So that's like the lowest rung in the chain of Seri Shalshos. Whereas when we look in Parshat Vayakhel, where it says the only prayer that rises at all is prayer with intention, this is referencing something else. This is referencing Zer Anpin of Asiya, which is higher than Malchus of Asiya. And he says that we see similarly this reference to Zer Anpin of Asiya. He says that this is as it's written in the Eitz Chaim and the Shar Shemot in the 3rd chapter there. So it's talking about the Zer Anpin of Asiya. So basically, what the way the Alter Rebbe resolves this seeming contradiction is he says that they're talking about two separate things. They're talking about the level that is referenced in Parshas Pekudai as to rising is the Malchus of Asiya, versus when Parshas Vayakhel says that it doesn't rise, because it doesn't rise to Zer Anpin of Asiya. It only rises to the level of Malchus of Asiya. Okay, so this is all well and good, but now the Alter Rebbe is going to bring another little wrench into this. And he says, okay, but what about the fact that in Parshas Pekudai, there's an implication that even invalid prayer, like if somebody prays, not only just without any intention at all, but they pray and they have like foreign thoughts, they're thinking about things that they shouldn't be thinking about, it says it seems to imply there that this prayer ascends to the first chamber, the first heichal it's called, from which then it is thrown down. And this chamber, this first heichal, is found, where is it found? It's found in the Zer Anpin of Bria, which Bria is the world that is right below Atzilus, right? So that's a very high level. So what's going on here? What are we talking about? And so the Alter Rebbe says, no, this is not a problem at all. Why? Because we see that even many different sins, whether they're minor, whether they're really more intense, all rise to that level. They rise to that level of the Heichal, which is found in the Zer Anpin of Bria, and even higher than that, as high even as the 4th chamber, which is even higher, the 4th Heichal. And this is written about in the Zohar on page 252a. So honestly, disclaimer, I don't know that much. I'm not super well versed into all the chambers, all the heichalos and where they're found and everything like that. But suffice it to say, the heichalos are like this kind of like external layer of each world. And so what the Alter Rebbe is saying here is that while, yes, different prayers and good deeds and actions and everything like that ascend to different worlds, sins unfortunately also do ascend. And they can ascend to these heichalos, to these different chambers. And so to explain all of this, the Alter Rebbe says that we can understand from all this that different ascensions, like just when we say something ascends, something goes up, that doesn't necessarily mean it's the same thing. There's many different types of ascension. So we call them all ascension. We call them all aliyot in Hebrew, but it doesn't mean the same thing. It's like, where is it ascending to? Is it ascending to the outer layer of the world, the inner layer of the world, the malchus of the world, the Zer Anpin of the world? There's all kinds of different things. And through this understanding, we can come to understand another teaching where it says in the Zohar on page 247 that in the second chamber, in the second heichal, so I'm assuming that's one above the first heichal, we find that the one appointed over the garments that clothe the soul as a result of their performance of their mitzvahs. So he doesn't really elaborate on what this is, but meaning to say it's just like, basically to give us this understanding that there are many different types of ascensions and not all ascensions are created equal. So some ascensions happen due to our Torah, due to our prayer with intention, or even not any intention at all, in which case it would go up to Malchus of Asiya. But then when we do bad things as well, those bad things have effects above as well. They also create ascensions, quote unquote, but just to different places, to these external levels. And some of these ascensions to different heichalos, different chambers can come about from good things as well, as we see this example in the Zohar, that in the second chamber, that's where we see the the one appointed over the garments that clothe the soul, when we do mitzvahs. So it's like when we do mitzvahs, as we've mentioned previously, our soul gets clothed in like holy light. And so the one appointed to do this, like sort of like the spiritual energy that's involved in this in this clothing, is found in the second chamber. So there's the basic idea is that the map is really vast and it's really complex, and it's not easy to kind of draw out and have it clear in your head because there's so much going on and there's so much relativity and all that kind of stuff. And then the Alter Rebbe gives a technical note here that where it says like the one who's appointed over clothing the garments, but there's another way to read this text that is actually that the garments themselves are housed in that place in the second chamber. And the reason, and again, there seems to be this contradiction because on the one hand, it's okay. So whether it's the one who's appointed over the garments or the garments themselves, that's where it's clothed there. But the mitzvahs themselves are actually found in the lower Gan Eden in the world of Asiya, as the Zohar explains in page 210. So a lot of technicalities here, and the main thing to take away from all of it is just that idea that there's lots of different ascensions. So if you ever read something like the Alter Rebbe has brought up, which seems to contradict, like it's like, wait a second, I read that prayer doesn't ascend at all if you don't have a good intention to it. But then I read somewhere else that it does ascend. So what's going on? What are we talking about ascension? How are we defining ascension in each instance? And what part of the map are we like zooming into here? So kind of like one way to kind of understand it is that like if you are, we think of a map as like north, south, east and west, but then what about like right and left? Like that's a different thing. Like depending on where you are in the map, you're going to be your right might be north, your right might be west, your right might be south, and your right might be east. Like it really depends on where you are in that map to be able to give that orientation. And even the terms north and south and east and west and all of that, it's like, it's very relative. It's like for us, like, let's say I'm living here in New York. So to me, when I think about Minnesota, right, that's to the west of where we are. But if I were to live in California, then Minnesota, all of a sudden it's not in the west, it's in the east, right? It's not like if somebody were to ask somebody in New York and somebody in LA, where is Minnesota? Which direction is Minnesota in? And one of them would say east and one of them would say west. You would think like, what is going on? But if you understand how maps work and you understand the worlds, everything makes perfect sense, right? So it's the same idea here, is that the Zohar, the spiritual worlds are really worlds, like true worlds unto themselves. And we're just getting these little glimpses from like a very teeny place, and we're not seeing the full bird's eye view. So that's sort of how to understand all of this. And so to break this down for you in a really simple way, just to explain it, is that when it comes to learning Torah, there are 3 levels. There's the highest level, which is the level when we learn Torah and we're consciously thinking about God. And it's like we're really, really consciously, when we learn that Torah, we're learning it for God's sake. We're learning it really out of this like love and fear of God. And it's very conscious and real in our minds. Then there's the middle level of Torah studying, one step below, which is where we don't have any negative intent while we're learning Torah, but are we consciously meditating about God the whole time? I don't know about that. Most of the time, we're probably maybe just trying to understand the words, trying to really just grasp what's being taught, and we're really focused on that, on understanding the concepts. That's the middle level. Then there's the lowest level of Torah study, which is this Torah study, which is for self-aggrandizement, for ego, for everybody will know how smart I am, and I want to gain something out of this Torah study. It's a very selfish kind of form of Torah study. That's the lowest level. Then we come to prayer. And when it comes to prayer, there are actually only 2 levels. There's prayer, which is with good intent. Or, I mean, when I say levels, there's actually many levels here. I should put that as a disclaimer, but there's 2 general levels that the Alter Rebbe has been discussing here, and it's easier for simplicity to keep that in mind. Level 1, the higher level of davening, is when you pray with feelings in your heart of love and fear of God. Like you're really praying with this really good intention, each one according to their level, right? Then there's the lower level of prayer where you're praying, but you're distracted. You're not really focused on the words. You're not really focusing on what you're saying and all of that kind of stuff. Okay. So those are the 2 different categories to keep in mind: 3 levels of Torah study and 2 levels of prayer. And what the Alter Rebbe focuses on today in this conclusion of Essay 3 is that actually when a person prays and they're distracted during their prayers, this isn't that bad. Because why? Because, I mean, it's, obviously we want to improve all the time, but this prayer that is like invalid, so to speak, meaning to say that a prayer that is that a person is very distracted in while they're praying, is actually better than learning Torah with negative intent, learning Torah out of self-aggrandizement. So it's like on the scale of like, where things are, then it's better to pray with and be distracted when you pray than to learn Torah for self-aggrandizement. Why? Because learning Torah for self-aggrandizement, as we've learned, is considered to be under the sun, quote unquote, meaning to say that it doesn't ascend at all. Like if somebody learns Torah, but their Torah study is like a very selfish form of learning Torah, then it doesn't rise. There's nothing for it to rise to. Versus prayer that a person prays, but they have this distraction within it, like they have improper thoughts, like scattered throughout their prayer. This prayer actually does ascend. It doesn't ascend that high. It ascends only to the lowest firmament, but it does ascend. Now, a really simple way to understand this is just like the basic idea that when when a person is praying, even if they're praying and they're being distracted, it's like the whole idea of prayer. Like, what are you doing when you're praying? You're praying to God. So obviously there is some kind of intention in the right place. So there's some kind of lifting up process that happens, even if it's not perfect. Versus learning Torah, there is a way, unfortunately, that a person can learn Torah that is very not good, that is very destructive, that it's called to the point that Torah is called a sam ha-chaim or sam ha-mavet. It's called the drug of life or the drug of death. So it really can be used in a negative way, unfortunately. I mean, we see this like as one example throughout history, like with Christians, right? Who they use Torah for their own sake, and the Crusades, and just think about all the that's just an example that comes to mind, is think about all the death and destruction that came about through them taking the Bible and misconstruing it for their own means. But this can happen really, unfortunately, to anybody. So we really need to be careful about that. Okay, but when it comes to learning Torah, so now we talked about that negative form of learning Torah, learn Torah for the sake of your ego. What about if you just learn Torah in like a neutral way? Like that it's not necessarily for the sake of heaven, like you're not consciously thinking about God, but you're just trying to understand the words. So the truth is, there is love there for God. It's just the love is latent and it's innate. It's just not necessarily manifest at that moment when you're learning Torah. So in that case, that form of Torah learning, that neutral level of Torah learning, the Alter Rebbe teaches that this is not any lower than the breath of the mouths of school children, which do lift up. So what does he mean by the breath of the mouth of school children? This is an allusion to a citation in the Gemara in Masechet Shabbos, page 109b, which describes the breath of school children as being untainted by sin. And it's a reference to school children davening, praying. So as I mentioned in the introduction, so while school children, they might not be praying with the highest of high intents, but nevertheless, there is something positive about it. And so somebody who learns Torah in a neutral manner, it's not considered any less than the prayer of school children, the breath of the mouths of school children, which are pure, which do ascend. And this breath of the school children, the prayer of the school children, it ascends upwards, even if it's not altruistic, even if it's not like totally, for the sake of God, but it's what's prompting these children to pray is because they are scared of getting punished by their teacher, right? They're scared that their teacher is going to yell at them if they don't pray. But nevertheless, even though that's their motivation, it still ascends. And then the Alter Rebbe concludes with a very interesting teaching from the Zohar on page 255b, that the angels elevate the breath of school children all the way to the world of Atzilus, which is the highest of all the worlds. So all of this requires a lot more investigation and study about all of this. It's very interesting, but the basic takeaway is a few things. Is first of all, we shouldn't take the prayers of children too lightly. There's something very pure and innocent about the prayers of school children that has a very that does ascend on high, and it's actually something we should aspire to. And we should all kind of tap into our inner child that has this innocence with them. And also when we learn Torah, even when we're learning Torah and we're not necessarily consciously thinking about God the entire time, we shouldn't get too down about this, because we should recognize the fact that we're learning Torah so long as like we don't have this like malicious intent behind it, that we want everybody to look at us as if we're so smart, or that we're going to use this Torah study in a negative way in some way. If we're learning it in a more neutral way, that is actually stemming from our innate love and fear of God. So, which is likened to this it's kind of on the same level as this prayer of schoolchildren, which again should not be taken so lightly. So that's it for today. And so we will continue tomorrow when we get into a new essay 4 of Kuntres Acharon. I will speak to you then. And once again, have a very happy Rosh Chodesh. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.